The forest groaned under the weight of the storm, every gust of wind snapping branches like bones. Through the curtain of rain, an old German shepherd dragged her weary body across the mud, her swollen belly swaying with each painful step. Her fur clung to her ribs, soaked and heavy, her eyes clouded with exhaustion yet burning with defiance. She was not wandering aimlessly, she was searching, though even she did not know for what. Then, a voice broke the night. Weak, hoarse, barely, louder than the storm itself. The shepherd's ears perked, and she followed the sound until the trees parted, revealing a man tied brutally against a trunk. A police officer, blood streaking down his temple, his wrists bound so tightly the rope had carved into his skin. His eyes met hers, filled with the kind of desperation only someone on the edge of death could hold. The shepherd froze, her body trembling as another contraction ripped through her, forcing a broken cry from her throat. She staggered forward, torn between collapse and courage, her gaze locked on the man whose life seemed to be slipping as fast as her own. And then his lips parted, the storm carrying his final plea through the darkness. If you leave me now, we both die here tonight. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this journey touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story of loyalty. The German shepherd trembled where she stood, her eyes locked on the man whose life dangled by a fraying thread. She could smell the copper tang of blood drifting from his wounds, mixing with the damp scent of earth. Her paws shifted uneasily, her belly heavy with the weight of unborn life, every step painful. Yet some invisible force anchored her there, keeping her from turning back into the darkness. Daniel Ruiz felt his vision blur as the storm lashed against his battered body. Hours had passed since his captors had left him bound, his uniform soaked and torn. He was a police officer, but tonight he was nothing more than a prisoner tied to a tree, bleeding into the soil. When his fading eyes caught sight of the shepherd, something deep inside him sparked, a fragile hope he could not afford to lose. The shepherd did not know his name, nor the world he came from. She only knew abandonment, hunger, and cold nights that stretched endlessly. Once, years ago, she had belonged to someone, her life filled with warmth and laughter. But age had dulled her strength, and when pregnancy came, she was cast aside like a burden too heavy to bear. For weeks, she wandered the outskirts of villages, searching for scraps, her swollen belly dragging her down. People shouted, threw stones, slammed doors, but none offered mercy. The storm had driven her into the forest, seeking shelter beneath broken trees. And now, when her own life teetered close to ending, she had stumbled into the clearing where Daniel was trapped. Daniel shifted, painfully, the ropes slicing deeper into his wrists. Each attempt to free himself only tightened the knots, cutting off his circulation. His breath came ragged, his throat dry from hours of shouting. He had been ambushed on patrol after uncovering the trail of a dangerous smuggling group, but his backup never arrived. Instead, he was dragged into the forest, tied to a tree, and left as prey for the storm. The shepherd lowered herself to the mud, panting as another contraction seized her. Her body screamed for rest, yet her eyes never left Daniel. Something about his gaze, hollow but pleading, reflected her own silent cry for help. She inched forward, ears pressed flat, torn between instinctive fear and an inexplicable pull. Daniel's heart twisted at the sight of her fragile frame. He could see the outline of her ribs beneath her soaked fur, her swollen sides quivering with each breath. "Mama," he whispered hoarsely, naming her not as a stranger, but as a mother. The words seemed to tremble in the storm, reaching her ears like a fragile bridge between their broken worlds. The shepherd whimpered softly, as though answering. Memories stirred in her heart, of children's laughter she once guarded, of the gentle hand that had fed her, of the night she was abandoned in the rain. The betrayal had cut deeper than hunger, but still she carried love, because inside her grew new lives she would not forsake. Tonight, in Daniel's broken eyes, she saw that same refusal to surrender. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the clearing in blinding white. Daniel flinched, his body jerking against the ropes. the sound of splitting wood echoing like gunfire. The shepherd pressed herself lower, ears twitching at the storm's fury. The forest seemed alive, groaning and creaking as though it too held its breath for the outcome of this unlikely meeting. Pain surged through her belly again, sharper this time, forcing her to cry out. Daniel's chest clenched at the sound, his own suffering momentarily forgotten. "Don't give up," he whispered through gritted teeth, his voice raw with desperation. "If you fight, I'll fight." His words were faint, but the conviction in them was undeniable. The shepherd's ears flicked, her body trembling as she pushed herself unsteadily to her feet. She stepped closer, mud sucking at her paws until she could smell the fear and exhaustion radiating from him. Her nose brushed against the rough rope binding his wrists, sniffing at the knots. Instinct told her to bite, to tear. But another wave of pain gripped her, forcing her back with a whimper. Daniel slumped forward, his hope flickering. He had never imagined that his lifeline would come in the form of an old, pregnant dog abandoned by the world. Yet as he watched her stagger and cry out, he realized she was fighting battles as heavy as his own. Their survival was tied together. Now, 2 lives, and many more within her, clinging to a fragile thread in the storm. The forest shifted again, but this time it was not thunder that cut the silence. Faint voices drifted through the trees, low and mocking, carried on the wind. Daniel's blood ran cold as he recognized them. The smugglers who had tied him here were coming back. His pulse raced, dread clawing at his chest. If they found him, still alive, and if they saw her, neither would stand a chance. The shepherd stiffened, ears pricked, her body trembling as her instincts screamed of danger. She stepped back into the shadows, her eyes darting toward the sound of approaching footsteps. Daniel's heart hammered as he strained against the ropes once more, his voice breaking in a desperate whisper. "No. Not now. Please. Don't. Let them see her." The voices grew louder, slicing through the storm like knives. Daniel's breath quickened, his heart hammering as he strained against the ropes digging into his wrists. The shepherd crouched low, her swollen belly pressing into the mud, her eyes darting toward the shadows. Every instinct told her to run, but the invisible thread of loyalty tethered her to the man bound before her. 2 figures emerged from the trees, their flashlights cutting jagged beams through the clearing. One carried a rifle slung across his shoulder, the other a heavy flashlight that swept across Daniel's battered form. "Still alive," the taller one sneered, his lips curling into a cruel grin. The other laughed coldly, kicking mud toward Daniel's boots. Not for long. Their beams shifted, catching the shepherd's trembling silhouette. She froze, ears pinned back, her eyes glowing faintly in the light. "What's this?" one muttered, his voice dripping with mockery. "An old mutt trying to play guardian?" The other man chuckled. "Looks like she's pregnant. Perfect. 1 shot and we can save her the trouble of suffering." Daniel's chest tightened, fury burning through his weakness. "Don't touch her," he rasped, straining so hard against the ropes that blood trickled fresh from his wrists. The men only laughed, stepping closer, their boots crunching against the wet earth. The shepherd's body trembled, her lips curling back in a low growl that seemed too fragile to scare anyone. But it was all she had. The taller man raised his boot and struck her shoulder, sending her stumbling into the mud. She whimpered, but forced herself upright, her ribs heaving as she staggered back into position, her eyes locked on Daniel, as though silently promising she would not abandon him. "Persistent, isn't she?" the man mocked, his smirk twisting in the flashlight's glare. Rain poured harder, drumming against leaves and drowning the silence with chaos. The shepherd lunged weakly at the man's boot, her teeth snapping inches from his leg. He cursed, stumbling back, and raised his rifle in reflex. Daniel shouted hoarsely, his voice raw with desperation. "Stop! She's just trying to protect her puppies." For the briefest moment, the rifle wavered. The shorter man sneered, lowering his flashlight toward the shepherd's swollen belly. "Puppies, huh? Then she's even more useless than I thought." He drew a knife from his belt, its blade gleaming in the stormlight. Daniel's heart sank, panic clawing at his chest as he realized they weren't just threatening him anymore. They were threatening her unborn lives. The shepherd staggered sideways, pain racking her body as another contraction forced her down. Yet her eyes burned with defiance as she pushed herself back to her paws. She moved between Daniel and the men, her body trembling but unyielding. The growl that rumbled from her throat was weak, but its message was clear. They would not pass. Without a fight. The men exchanged uneasy glances, their amusement fading into irritation. "This is taking too long," the taller one muttered, gripping his rifle tighter. "Let's finish it." He raised the weapon, its barrel glinting as lightning split the sky. Daniel's voice broke into a scream, but the storm swallowed it whole. Before the man could fire, a deafening crack echoed through the clearing. A tree branch, swollen with rain, snapped from above and crashed between them, sending mud and splinters flying. The men cursed, stumbling backward, their light scattering. Wildly, the shepherd collapsed against Daniel's legs, whimpering in pain, her body twitching as the storm raged on. Daniel gasped, his chest heaving, his voice trembling as he whispered, "Please, hold on." He could feel her trembling against him, every breath weaker than the last. Above the storm, the men regrouped, their shadows looming closer once again. And as the shepherd lifted her weary head, her eyes shimmering with pain, Daniel finally saw it clearly, her belly contracting, her life bleeding into labor. The shepherd lay trembling in the mud, her breath shallow, her belly tightening with a force she could not control. Daniel felt her body spasm against his legs, realization dawning like a knife through his chest. This was not just exhaustion. She was in labor. His blood ran cold as he understood the weight of it. She was fighting not only for herself, but for the fragile lives pressing against her ribs. The men froze, their mocking sneers faltering as they watched her convulse. She's giving birth," one muttered, his grip on the knife loosening. The taller man cursed under his breath, shaking his head. "Worthless animal. She won't survive the night anyway." Yet even he could not mask the unease in his voice as the truth became undeniable. Daniel's throat burned as he shouted through the storm, his voice raw. "Do you see it now? She's not just a stray. She's a mother, and she's fighting harder than either of you cowards ever." "Good." His words carried fury, but also desperation, for he knew the storm outside was not the only battle raging. The shepherd's contractions came faster, her whimpers sharper, her body trembling on the edge of collapse. One of the men stepped back, muttering, "This is bad luck. We shouldn't be here when she drops them." His partner snarled, refusing to retreat, gripping the rifle tighter as rain cascaded down his face. "Bad luck or not, we're not leaving loose ends. The mutt dies here, and so does he." Lightning flashed above, throwing their shadows long and menacing across the clearing. The shepherd forced herself upright, swaying violently, yet her body remained between Daniel and the men. Her eyes, clouded with pain, locked onto theirs with an intensity that silenced the storm for a heartbeat. She lowered her head, teeth bared, every tremor in her frame a declaration of defiance. Daniel's breath caught. She was breaking herself apart, but she refused to surrender. Rain pelted, her back plastering her fur to her frail frame as another contraction ripped through her. A muffled cry escaped her throat, piercing even the thunder, raw and heartbreaking. One of the men cursed again, his bravado cracking. "She's insane. She's about to die, and she still stands like that." His words betrayed something he could not hide: fear. Daniel's heart thundered as his mind screamed for escape, but the ropes dug deeper, pinning him to his prison. Helpless, he leaned forward as far as he could, whispering hoarsely, "Hold on, Mama. Just hold on." Her ear twitched faintly at his voice, her body trembling harder, her eyes flicking toward him as though drawing strength from his words. Then it happened. Her belly rippled violently, and a faint, fragile sound pierced the storm. A newborn pup, slick and tiny, slipped onto the mud between her trembling legs. The whimper was weak but alive, a spark of life in the heart of chaos. The men staggered back, their eyes widening as the impossible unfolded before them. An old, dying shepherd bringing new life into the storm. The tiny whimper cut through the storm, fragile yet powerful, proof of life born in the mud. The shepherd collapsed over her pup, nudging it gently with her trembling nose, her body shaking from exhaustion. Daniel's chest tightened as he watched her lick the newborn clean, even as another contraction seized her frame. She was breaking apart, yet her instinct to protect never faltered. The men stood frozen, the storm's fury reflected in their uneasy eyes. One of them cursed, spitting into the mud, trying to mask his fear. "This is madness, she won't last another minute." The other gritted his teeth, raising his rifle again. "Then let's end it. One shot, and this all stops." Daniel's heart thundered, his voice ripping raw from his throat. "If you fire that gun, you're killing more than her. You'll be killing every innocent life she's fighting to bring into this world." His words carried over the storm, desperate and furious. For a heartbeat, the man's finger hovered over the trigger, wavering between cruelty and the undeniable truth before his eyes. The shepherd lunged weakly forward, staggering but determined, placing her frail body in front of Daniel once more. Her belly contracted again, forcing her to cry out as a second pup slid into the mud, silent and still. Daniel's heart froze. Was it already gone? Panic surged through him, helplessness crushing him as the shepherd pawed desperately at the lifeless newborn. With a surge of will, she licked furiously, nudging, whimpering, refusing to accept death. Then at last, a faint gasp escaped the tiny chest, followed by a weak cry. Daniel's eyes blurred with tears as relief washed over him. Even in her final moments of strength, she had willed another heartbeat into the world. The men cursed again, their fear boiling into anger. "Enough of this," one roared, stepping forward with his knife glinting in the stormlight. But before he could strike, a bark split the night, a fierce, sharp sound that cut through the chaos. Luna burst into the clearing, the loyal patrol dog of another officer, followed by the glow of flashlights as backup stormed in behind her. The smugglers staggered back, their bravado crumbling as uniformed figures emerged from the trees. "Drop it!" a commanding voice barked, rifles snapping up in unison. The men hesitated only a moment before fleeing into the forest, swallowed by the storm and the shadows. Relief crashed over Daniel like a wave, though his wrists still burned, his body still bound. Hands reached for him, cutting the ropes free, pulling him forward. But his eyes were only on her. The shepherd lying in the mud, her pups nestled weakly against her side. Her breaths were shallow, her body trembling, her eyes half closed but still fixed on him. Daniel crawled to her, cradling her head in his, trembling hands whispering, "You saved me and them. Now let me save you." The storm had eased by the time Daniel stumbled into the clinic, the shepherd cradled in his arms. Her body was limp, her fur matted with mud and blood, but her chest still rose faintly. The two newborn pups whimpered weakly inside his jacket, their cries small but stubborn against the silence. "Help her!" Daniel shouted hoarsely, his voice cracking as he burst through the doors. The vet and her assistants rushed forward, lifting the shepherd gently onto a table under the harsh white lights. Machines beeped as wires and tubes connected to her fragile frame, their sounds filling the air with a rhythm that seemed too fragile to last. The vet's brows furrowed deeply as she pressed a stethoscope against the shepherd's chest. Her heartbeat is faint, dangerously faint. She's on the edge. Daniel hovered by her side, refusing to let go of her paw. His fingers trembled as he stroked her mud-caked fur, whispering, "You fought for me out there. Now I'll fight for you." Her amber eyes flickered open briefly, dull, but filled with something that broke him. Trust. She pressed her paw weakly into his hand, and for the first time he felt the invisible bond between them tighten like a vow. The first pup was placed into an incubator, its tiny chest rising and falling, with fragile determination. The second pup lay motionless at first, forcing the assistant to rub its frail body with a towel. Daniel's heart stopped, his eyes blurring as seconds dragged like hours. Then, a weak cry broke the tension, the fragile sound bringing relief, that melted into tears on his face. But the mother's body trembled violently, her breaths uneven as her strength slipped further away. The vet injected fluids, adjusting the oxygen mask as urgency filled every movement. "She's critical," the vet warned, her voice steady but grim. "If she gives up now, nothing will keep her here." Daniel bent low, his forehead pressing against hers, whispering fiercely, "Don't give up. Your fight isn't over. Your babies need you. I need you." Minutes felt like hours, the room filled with the storm's fading echo and the fragile beeps of machines. Slowly, painfully, the shepherd's breathing steadied, the shallow gasps giving way to longer, steadier pulls. The vet exhaled, tension softening her features. "She's holding on," she said softly, though her eyes carried caution. "She's not out of danger yet, but she's fighting." Daniel's tears fell freely as he brushed her fur, his voice breaking with relief. "That's it, Mama. Stay with me." Her paw twitched against his hand again, firmer this time as though answering his plea. Around them, the fragile cries of her newborns filled the room, proof that life had clawed its way back from the storm. In that moment, man and dog were no longer strangers. They were survivors bound by the same fight. The storm had broken by morning, leaving behind a fragile calm that spread across the town. Sunlight filtered weakly through the clinic windows, illuminating the shepherd as she lay curled around her two pups. Her breaths were still shallow but steadier, her eyes opening slowly as warmth replaced the cold shadows of the night. Daniel sat close by, exhaustion etched into his face, his hand never leaving her paw. The vet entered quietly, her tired smile carrying both relief and warning. "She made it through the night," she said, her voice gentle. "But she'll need time and care. She's stronger than I expected." Daniel exhaled shakily, tears catching in his throat as he looked at the fragile family nestled together. Against every odd, they had survived. One of the pups wriggled, letting out a weak squeak as it pressed closer to its mother's side. The shepherd lifted her head weakly, nudging them closer, her maternal instinct never faltering despite her exhaustion. Daniel reached out, his voice a whisper. "They're safe now because of you. You gave everything for them and for me." Her eyes softened, reflecting gratitude and something deeper, trust reborn in pain. But the night had left scars. One tiny pup, smaller than the rest, had not survived the storm's cruelty. Daniel bowed his head, as the vet gently carried the still bundle away, grief weighing heavy in his chest. Yet when his gaze returned to the mother and the surviving pups, he felt a surge of awe. Life had still fought its way through death. Outside, officers arrived to take Daniel's report, their voices hushed with reverence as they glanced at the fragile family inside. Word had already begun to spread about the old shepherd who had stood against death itself to shield a man and her unborn children. To them, she was not just a stray. She was a warrior. Daniel, however, saw her as something even greater: family. When the clinic finally discharged her, Daniel carried her gently into his arms, her pups tucked safely against her. His steps were slow, each one a silent promise. "You'll never be abandoned again," he whispered. "Your home is with me now. Whatever storm comes next, we face it together." The shepherd rested her head against his chest, her tail thumping, faintly, weak but full of meaning. Her pups stirred softly, their cries filling the quiet morning. For the first time since that terrible night, hope no longer felt fragile. It was alive, breathing, and warm in Daniel's arms. The morning sun cast golden rays across the quiet clinic yard as Daniel carried the shepherd and her pups into the light. The storm that had nearly claimed them all was gone, leaving only the fragile peace of survival. She lay cradled in his arms, her two puppies pressed close, their tiny cries a reminder that life had fought its way through the darkness. For Daniel, this was more than a rescue. It was a miracle born from pain, loyalty, and courage. The shepherd had walked into his nightmare when hope was gone, and in doing so, she gave him the strength to keep fighting. She had stood against cruelty, against the storm, and against death itself to shield both her unborn and a man she had never known. Now, as she nestled into his embrace, she was no longer a stray, no longer abandoned. She was a mother, a warrior, and part of his family. Stories like hers remind us that loyalty is not taught. It is lived. Even in her weakest moment, she chose to protect, to trust, and to fight. And in return, she found the home and love she had been denied for so long.